Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where we look at another model in my classic computer collection. And today we're going to have a look at this little computer, the ZX81. Now, the ZX81 was released in 1981, and you could think of it as perhaps just a toy computer. And in fact, back in the day, some people thought of it just like that, feeling dismissive of the model. This was particularly true if you'd been using other computers of the time and you picked one up and played with it. And with its 1K memory and membrane keyboard, well, it was a pretty minimal machine. But really, to curl your lip at this machine really misses the point. Now, although it didn't do too well in the USA, where it was released as the Timex 1000, in Britain and Australia and New Zealand, this little machine introduced a whole host of families to the world of computing and computer technology, particularly kids. And many of these kids went on to become the IT specialists and the programmers of the future. So we're looking at it in terms of impact. The 1.5 million units sold certainly earned the ZX81 stripes as a classic computer. So let's have a look at it. Before we get to discussing the ZX81 itself, we've got to really mention this man, Clive Sinclair, whose company, Sinclair Research, produced the machine. You can see him here riding on one of his electric cars. These were another one of his passions. Now, Sir Clive was a British inventor and entrepreneur who had scored big hits in the British calculator market in 1972. And in the late 1970s, he saw the need for some sort of cheap and easy-to-assemble computer in Britain. And he came up with the ZX80. Now, this was a kit set computer. It was released in 1980, and it was targeted at hobbyists and actually turned out to be quite popular with them. Sir Clive was after a larger market, though, and he had this gut feeling that he could also sell computers to the general public, if only the price was right. Well, he hit the jackpot with a natural successor to the ZX80, the ZX81. This was released in March 1981. You could buy it fully made up as well as in kit form, and the general public could buy one of these for a mere £69.95. Now, at this price, it was far lower than any microcomputer on the market in Britain, and people could get them from regular electronic shops, not just mail order. They were a roaring success. Now, one of the things Sir Clive excelled at was promotion, and he promoted and marketed this computer very aggressively. He used a lot of hype and superlatives. The style reminded me very much of what Dick Smith did in Australia and here for the System 80. Not only that, there was an appeal to patriotism. This was a British computer. It was made by a British firm for British people, as opposed to those foreign computers sold by the USA. So that was part of the marketing strategy. This picture shows a New Zealand advertisement just prior to Christmas in 1982. I'm not sure when the ZX81 started selling in New Zealand. It could have actually been a year earlier, but so I'm not sure if the price had moved any, but I suspect it hadn't. Anyway, you can see it priced there at $1.99. Just for reference, the New Zealand dollar at that time was buying about 50 cents US, so that's around about $100 US. Now, note the sales pitch there down at the bottom. It says, Mum, Dad, the whole family can have fun with the ZX81. It's great for games, education, business, household budgets and calculations. It's also an investment in the future. Today's ZX81 helps prepare your children for the computer age of tomorrow. And that's the thing. It was priced and it was pitched as a doorway into this computer technology everyone was starting to talk about. A kind of starting step where you and your kids could find out more about it without too much investment. Here's a chart I made up showing the changing price of home computers in the early 80s. These were taken from, or was compiled rather, from advertisements that appeared in New Zealand Bits and Bytes. Now, the graph starts in late 1982 because that's when the first issue came out. And that was about the time that advertisement that we saw just before appeared. Now you'll see there that the ZX81 at $200 is way lower than the competition. You can see the VIC-20 there at about $900, and although not on the chart, the System 80 was being sold at that stage and possibly was around $800 or so. Anyway, the point is that the ZX81 was at a low enough price where the general public just might take a punt to find out what these computers were all about. Now, $200 was still a lot of money those days, but it was a lot less than the VIC-20 or the System 80, so people just snapped them up. I should mention, though, that the cash handover didn't stop with the purchase of the ZX81 itself. First, you needed a power supply, and that cost you an extra $29. And if you wanted more than the paltry 1K of memory that came with the computer, and let's face it, there's not much you could do with 1K, so who wouldn't want more, then you had to shell out for a 16K RAM pack that cost almost as much as the computer itself. Now, this practice of selling a basic unit and then having high-priced accessories that were more or less essential, it wasn't just a feature of the ZX81. In fact, all manufacturers of home computers of the time did this, meaning that a workable unit usually cost you far more than initially you might have envisaged. So, time to have a close look at the machine. Here's my ZX81 setup for this video. And as you can see, like most home computers of the era, it had a spaghetti junction of wires and cables. Tape recorder is from the same period as the ZX81, but the television is not. The television is a fairly modern one. You can see there the ZX81 has got the 16K RAM pack plugged into the back, so we're all set now for our demo. Just a close-up of the power supply brick. It's badged for the ZX, and the cords are very long, which is quite helpful, particularly when you consider that this was designed to be used with a family TV set. So it would have been sitting in front of the television but back from it, and you would have needed to find a power socket for the unit, and it could have been some distance from the computer itself, or maybe even the socket the TV was plugged into. So here is the infamous ZX81 keyboard. Now I say infamous not because it's a membrane keyboard, which could be expected on a low-cost computer of the day, but more for the unusual way the keys worked. The ZX81 has various input modes, and shifted and unshifted key presses would give you either a basic keyword or a letter, depending on these modes. This was designed to speed up entry of basic programs, and this was fine once you were proficient in the key combinations. But if you had used a regular keyboard, or you used a regular keyboard entry, this arrangement was quite confusing and frustrating. Thankfully, as most ZX81 owners had never owned a computer before, they didn't really know any different. So, coming around the side of the machine, we see from left to right, first up the RF cable, which plugged into the aerial socket of television. Now, the computer produced a signal in the UHF band, so you had to have a TV that could receive that. Next, there were the air and mic jacks, and these were labelled as such to indicate the corresponding jacks on the tape recorder, so a couple of cables plugged in there. Finally, we've got the power cord. Now, one interesting thing about the ZX81 is there's no on and off switch. The whole design of the unit was to ensure that they were ultra cheap to produce, and Clive considered even a power switch superfluous. You simply switched the unit off and on by removing or inserting the cord. Oh, that's the way you rebooted the machine also. So moving around to the back, and what do we see but a single expansion slot. Now this slot was mostly used for the 16K RAM expander, which just plugged into the back. You could certainly do a lot more with 16K than you could with 1K. So we'll finish off our hardware review with a look at the innards of the ZX81. Now this picture is from the manual, and you can see there the elegant simplicity of the machine. There's just 4 ICs. These are labelled so you can see what they do. The most innovative one was this SCL chip, which is labelled as dog's body. That's the one up the top. This facilitated a number of key functions that, when you looked at competing computers, were shared between multiple integrated circuits, whereas this had them bundled all into one, so it had a very, very reduced chipset. Now there's just one other thing I want to mention before we move on to software regarding the ZX81, and this was the issue with the RAM pack. Now you can see there that it's got a a set of pins, and it just slips over the card edge, and it's only the friction of the pins that holds it there. Well, sometimes this friction wasn't enough, particularly when you might have moved the machine a bit when you were pushing the keys or using it. And what would happen is the machine would just spontaneously reboot, and you would lose all of that, all of your program that you might have been typing in there for hours from, say, a magazine. It was very frustrating for users and caused a lot of anguish. And people tended to use blue tack or sticky bits, anything they could do to try and stop that particular mechanism from flexing. In fact, it was so much a feature. I won't say feature because that implies it was good, but was certainly so much a characteristic of the ZX81 RAM pack that it even appears in some emulators. So if you want to reproduce that feeling of suddenly losing all your data, there's a little menu item that you can select there called RAM pack wobble, and that'll do it for you. Now, I've got two of these RAM packs, and you can see the one at the top there, in the top left, is a badge ZX81 RAM pack, and that has a real problem with wobble. But the one at the bottom right, is a Timex one. And you can see there the pins are a lot closer together, and this certainly seems to help. That Timex one is certainly less susceptible to the wobble problem than the ZX81. Now it's time to put our ZX81 to work. Even though this particular setup has 16K, what I'll show you first is a program that will run in an unexpanded unit, that is in just 1K. So first we'll switch the unit on in the usual manner by plugging in the power lead. So the machine will boot to show a K on the screen, and that means it's ready for keyboard commands. So we'll type in load, double quotes, and then set up the tape recorder to load a tape of the program. So we'll just insert a cassette and push play on the tape recorder. The tape will start spinning, and off screen I'll push enter so the computer's receptive to any program coming in, and in a moment we'll have our game loaded. Now when you load a ZX81 program on a television of the day, you get these very distinctive diagonal stripes as the program loads. With my modern television I didn't get that, I just got a blue screen, so I decided not to show you that. It's not very interesting to look at, so I edited that out. But here you see the program running. Now this is a version of Frogger, actually called Q-Frogger, by a guy that goes under the handle of VWiz. It's a brilliant game when you consider this is only 1K in length, can run in the unexpanded ZX81, and yet it's very, very playable. We've got our vehicles travelling in different speeds in different directions. We've got logs at the top there going backwards and forwards. Quite a difficult game to play. Certainly the programming prowess is much better than my game playing prowess, because I tend to get killed just like that. But it does show you what can be done in just 1K with some clever programming. I now want to show you the kind of game you could play on an expanded ZX81. However, if you have a look carefully at the top of the screen, you'll notice that this is not being shown on my ZX81. This is being shown on an emulator. Now the reason I'm using an emulator rather than my expanded ZX81 is a precautionary tale which I'll take a moment to relate. My modern TV doesn't like the ZX81 much. As as I fine-tune it, there's still a bit of horizontal pull on the screen. You might have noticed a little of that on Q-Frogger. I found when I loaded in Helicopter 3000, which uses all of the screen real estate, the instability got worse. Now I'm sure it's not my ZX81. I used to have an old TV of about the same vintage of the computer that I ran it on, and the image on that TV was just fine. However, one day recently I decided I had too many of these TVs and I disposed of it. I didn't think that mattered that much, as I had 3 other TVs. One is of a similar vintage, but doesn't do UHF, and the other 2 are self-tuning modernish ones. Well, the latter 2 give a less than stable image with the ZX81, and I now wish I'd never disposed of the old TV. So the moral of the story is this: if you have a vintage computer, keep a screen of similar vintage. It probably works better. Anyway, that's the reason why I'm showing you this in an emulator. On my old TV, this is what it looked like. Now, the chief developer for this game was a fellow New Zealander, Philip Lord, who goes under the handle Nama in many forums, and some people watching this might know Philip. It's a pretty simple game, but fun to play. So you have a helicopter that has to try to bomb the tank below while avoiding the missiles that it's firing at it, and also avoid the bombs dropping from the craft above. So helicopter's quite manoeuvrable, a little bit jerky, but if you think of what the ZX81 is trying to do, there's no specific chips to handle the screen display or the graphics, so the poor old Z80 CPU is really doing all the work here, and does pretty well. So I've just got to try and maneuver my helicopter round and try to get that tank that's below me. Might do it. Yes. So you can see, with an expanded ZX81, you can develop some fun games. Every ZX81 came with this manual. It's a very good manual in that it takes the user through, leads them by the hand, starts off with how to set up the machine, starts to get into some command line processing of BASIC, and then programming in BASIC, and finally gets down to the nitty-gritty towards the end about how the computers work, organization of memory, sort of system variables, appendices, talk about some machine code stuff, which was really good for the uninitiated. What some manuals could do was scare people once they sort of open the pages and start to look at all these peeks and pokes and discussion about memory locations, etc. And this manual doesn't do that. It eases the user in quite gently. And I imagine if you'd work through it from beginning to end, you'd have a pretty good appreciation of not only basic programming, but also how computers work. A very good tutorial manual. Now I'll just leave you with one last look at the ZX81. Here it is set up in an earlier display, playing that old favourite, Space Invaders. Well, I hope you enjoyed that look at the ZX81. I was one of those people that dismissed the computer pretty much as a toy back in the day, but seeing it now in its historical perspective and the impact it had on just people's exposure to microcomputing in the early 80s, I've changed my mind and certainly regard it as a classic, and I'm pleased to have one in my collection. So until next time, keep well, and hopefully catch you in the next video.